Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Military Trailblazer Office Hours. Thanks so much for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here in the spirit of community, mentorship, and learning. I'm your host, Dave Nava. I'm a lead solution engineer at Salesforce and a military trailblazer. Each week, we invite a co-host or co-host, as is the case tonight, to take part in the conversation so we can leverage their experience, their expertise, and unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is actually twofold. We'll be exploring the Salesforce application and interview process, as well as the enterprise commercial sales solution engineer role. And I'd like to welcome and briefly introduce our co-host for tonight's session. Roger Miranda is a senior solution engineer at Salesforce. He's a 5-time certified, 6 times Ranger, is an Army veteran, and a military trailblazer. Roger's career in the Salesforce ecosystem has included roles as a recruitment consultant, a system administrator, and a business analyst, in addition to his current role. Roger, it is awesome to have you co-hosting Office Hours with me once again. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate the opportunity to come back and talk to folks, and super happy to be here with my teammate, Chris Bowers.
Awesome. And as I mentioned, we have a surprise co-host joining us tonight. Chris Bowers is also a solution engineer at Salesforce. He's a 4-time certified, 2-time Ranger, a Navy veteran, go Navy, beat Army, and a military trailblazer. Chris has a portfolio of Salesforce experience with a background in business analysis, system administration, product ownership, and sales operations analysis. Awesome you could join us tonight to co-host the session, Chris. Thank you and welcome to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Dave. Absolutely glad to be here.
Awesome. And so public service announcement, folks, because I am in the coat room of the basement of the Javits Center, if I should lose connection, Elio, if you could just kind of run the show momentarily while I reestablish connection, that would be great. But continue to talk amongst yourselves. I will pop back in, I promise. Before we kind of go into the administrative items, it would be awesome if each of you could take a moment to further introduce yourselves and share your Salesforce stories for context for the audience. Roger, would you like to go first?
Yes. Unfortunately, I've started the Army-Navy banter in the chat, so my apologies, team. So my name is Roger Miranda, Army veteran. So I started out needing money for college because I couldn't afford it. So I joined Army ROTC in school, and I got out of college, and I was a field artilleryman. Initially, only planning to do 4 years. Somehow 4 years turned into 22, just because either A, I really liked it, or B, I just didn't know when to quit. So either way, so first 10 years was in field artillery, cannons, rockets, all those cool things. But then after 10 years, I transitioned into simulation operations, which is really like creating virtual spaces to train soldiers. So I tell people I'm kind of like, if you remember the Hunger Games, I'm like the game master where I just, control the virtual environment. People did all kinds of stuff, right? But just not as evil. And then, so I retired from the Army in 2019. In about 2018 is when I started in earnest looking for what am I going to do next, when I get out of the Army. So that's when I found Salesforce. Back then it was F-Force. Today it's Trailhead Military, Salesforce Military. I also found a nonprofit Merivis that was based in Texas. I'm in Texas right now. So through Merivis, I was able to get my admin certification in 2018. And then I also went back to the Merivis well and got my platform app builder certification in 2019. And then there's a recurring trend. Merivis again, and actually Elio was my coach for that cohort, which was the Sales Service Community Cloud cohort, and then did all that, and I took a left turn and became a recruiter. I wasn't planning on being a recruiter, but I did. Got to work with Stephanie Herrera, who's a wonderful advocate for veterans in the Salesforce space, but recruiting was too much. Or I'm sorry, the commute was too much. I was working in Austin. It was like an hour back and forth each day. So I stopped that, and then I was able to have a Salesforce admin role working for the Trailhead military team, which was great. Right when the pandemic hit, so it was like March to June. So I could not have asked for a better time to have that job because I was working remote. Unfortunately, it was a 3-month contract, and then I was unemployed for 3 months just because it was the pandemic. The companies didn't know what the hell was going on, and the world literally turned upside down. So for 3 months, I was out of a job. So what did I do? 3 months, I got 3 certifications because I figure I had to do something with this time to make myself more marketable. Luckily, I was able to use take advantage of the Salesforce Military Hiring Our Heroes program. Through that, I got I got hired on at Capgemini Government Solutions, where I was a BA for pretty much a year until I came on to Salesforce as a senior solutions engineer. So that's my story.
That's awesome. And for those that aren't aware, Roger and I actually transitioned roughly at the same time. So we went through Miravis together. I think, Roger, you were slightly ahead of me. But yeah, similar stories. Thanks so much for sharing. And it's cool to think about all the different experiences you've had in a relatively short amount of time that have lent insight into what you're able to provide now for Salesforce. And Chris, you have a similar story, right? So I'd love to hear that if you'd like to share your professional story next.
Yeah. So much like Roger, college and the expense of college did not seem like the go-to option. And so I jumped into the military straight out of high school, joined actually the nuclear program because they had the biggest signing bonus and you got to come in as an E3. So I didn't really know what an E3 was, but they made me hold the paperwork on the way to MEPS. So that was kind of my start. I did that for a year. That is one ridiculous program. I was getting 4 hours a night for 6 months of sleep just because of studying. And so ended up failing the final test of that school and they dropped me from the program. Gave me a couple options. One of those being a linguist. And I thought, well, shoot, foreign languages, that never hurt anybody. So off I went to California, picked up Farsi. And then after that, first duty station was Bahrain. So got to go overseas. Got there the day before 9/11 took place. So things got exciting really quickly. Was out at sea within 2 weeks, hopping from ship to ship. Did just over a year there and re-enlisted out there with the opportunity to go pick up a second language. So got sent to DC that time to pick up Urdu. So Farsi, language of Iran, Urdu, language for Pakistan. And that had follow-on orders to Hawaii. I thought, I'm getting the sweetest gig I could ever ask for in the Navy. Went out there, did 4 years, got to go to like NSA and kind of speak before leadership there, which later transitioned to one of those things that I was able to really use in talking with senior leadership for anywhere. When you're a little enlisted person, you're having to talk to generals and colonels and admirals and all that. It made things a lot easier. But I realized I wanted to do more on the analytical side than being a linguist. I wasn't great at foreign languages, just passable. But the Navy said, no. They said, we spent all this money on you for you to be a linguist. And I said, well, then I'm going to get out. And they said, okay, that sounds like a good return on our investment. So I got out, had no idea what to do. I moved to Texas. I'm originally from the Northwest, Portland, Oregon. Went to UT, got my degree in government because that's what I'd been doing for the last 9 years. And then needed a job. So went to a little property preservation company, eventually switched to kind of working on the business. And that was where I discovered Salesforce. So kind of the accidental admin route. Found what I could do on that platform, the ability to kind of make my visions come true without having to be a developer. Worked my way up that way, then became a product owner, kind of ran a group there, really guiding requirements and the enhancements we do both to our proprietary system and to Salesforce. That led me to my ability to switch over to HID Global, which was my last company. They're a major security provider, primarily like physical access. Started there as a business analyst. I thought I was going there to be an admin. I'd actually get to click on stuff inside Salesforce instead of telling other people what to do. That was not the case. So developed my business analyst skills some more, moved up into a product owner role. I actually ran our Salesforce instance there from the business side. I had a partner on the IT side. And so that kind of really built my skill set as far as, really understanding things. I got my first certification 6 years ago. That was my admin one. I've done Miravis only as a coach. I've never actually been up through the program as a student, but it's a phenomenal program. But that's kind of, I've just kind of been at it for the last almost 7 years now.
That's awesome, Chris. Yeah, a lot like Roger, a lot of different unique career experience that I'm sure helps you out in your current role. It's funny, we're all associated with Maravis, and I'm sure many folks on this call are. If you haven't heard of Maravis, do hit us up when it's time for questions, and we can go over exactly what that is and how best it can support you on your professional journey. So before we get to the discussions session, I noticed some new faces, which is awesome. And so for those joining for the first time, I always like to briefly explain the purpose of these office hours, before we open the floor for questions and get into general discussion. These sessions are an informal get-together for gathering with military trailblazers as well as allies. Everyone's welcome to attend to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding related topics so that we can help you achieve your professional development and your career related goals. For the next hour, it's intended to be an opportunity for collaborative mentorship. So everyone on the call is encouraged to step up if you'd like and help answer questions from your perspective, which will, of course, provide additional diversity of experience to the answers given. As always, I'll be posting things in the chat window as we progress through the session, LinkedIn articles, employment opportunities, volunteer opportunities. So do keep an eye on chat. That is also posted with the YouTube video on my YouTube channel. If you want to ask a question at any point during today's sessions, please feel free to do so. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up, no worries. You can post your questions in chat. If you do feel comfortable speaking up, just raise your hand in the app and we'll call on you in order and we will go from there. And so I'll go ahead and kick us off. Now, as I mentioned, dual focus for tonight. I think it said on your LinkedIn profiles, Roger, you've been with Salesforce for 5 months and Chris for 7. And so you both have relatively fresh perspectives on the application and interviewing process. And I think a lot of folks probably have questions on, what does that look like? And so what I'd like to do first is to talk about that process. And so, I guess, Chris, if you want to lead us off, and you can kind of go back and forth, walk us through your thought process and your approach in applying for the role kind of prior to the interview stage. So, what factors determine your choice, networking, what your motivations, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. So when I was at HID Global, one of the things I started to get kind of frustrated with was, our IT group, there was a lot of internal politics and stuff like that. What I saw is really being able to open the doors with what Salesforce could do for the company just wasn't getting translated higher up. And so I reached out to our account director and our solution engineer that worked the account at HID Global to say, tell me more about like the different roles at Salesforce, especially the solution engineer role that I've seen. Because I really like what my friend Alex, who is our solution engineer, what he kind of does and how he showcases Salesforce to us. Like, this is what gives me ideas, and I want to do that art of possible. I want to open up the doors for companies and show them what's possible and how, Salesforce can be that platform to really leverage everything that they've got and make their company that much better. So that was like my start into it, was to actually talk with those that I already knew inside the company, which is where I would say, like, networking, regardless of whether it's Salesforce corp, like to actually go work for the mothership or to work for any company within the ecosystem, it's networking hands down is what opens doors.
Can you give me some examples? And I would, first of all, I'd agree with you 100%, networking is key, but can you give me some examples of how you leveraged your network to kind of pursue this role?
Yeah. So like I said, I mentioned, I reached out to my account director, who was then willing to give a recommendation. She sung my praises. Thankfully, I'd met with her numerous times. This was all pre-pandemic, that I got to meet with her in person. So really just establish that relationship. From there, when I actually started to go through the process, the Salesforce interview process for the solution engineer role was the craziest interview process I'd ever been a part of. Everything from getting a coach to help you through the interview process. But then I started leveraging any of the people that I knew. I leveraged Alex that I'd mentioned, that was a solution engineer, and bounced ideas off of them. It was a lot of reaching out and asking questions and not feeling afraid, I guess, to ask dumb questions. my thought was I haven't worked there, so anything and everything was fair game to me. So that was kind of my approach to getting that first start and talking with the recruiter.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I want to kind of hit on something you said where there are no dumb questions. A lot, I've heard in the past that people will be afraid to ask questions because they don't want to appear like they don't know the answer, right? But how are you going to get that answer if you don't have the courage to speak up and actually admit that? And so, one of the things, as you all know, the solution engineer role is you can't possibly know everything, right? So you have to have that courage to tell the customer sometimes, I don't know, but I will find out and I'll get back to you. And then obviously, if you do that, all is good. So thanks for pointing that out. I appreciate that. Roger, do you want to take over and kind of present your thought process and your approach for applying for the role kind of prior to the interview stage?
Yeah. So for me, so I was a BA. So Chris had a similar experience where he was a business analyst, and I really wanted to. I wanted to be more technical on the platform, and it's kind of like you wear many hats when you're in a company. So even though I was a business analyst, I did other things in supporting roles. So, whenever the company needed to respond to a RFI, request for information, or RFP, request for proposal, if they needed a Salesforce technical asset, then, I was assigned the RFP and do that. And then similarly, so we had to do demos because as we were a Salesforce partner, we would do Salesforce demos for, prospective clients. So I got to work on, in my time there, I did 2 demos, one for the Marine Corps Embassy Support Group, which is pretty cool, and then another one for the U.S. Air Force School of Aerospace Medicine. So, and for me personally, like that was the most fun that I had while on the job, was building stuff and building demos, because like that's really why I like Salesforce, just the ability to like build stuff in the platform, because like I'm a geek, bottom line, right? So for me, that was the best part, because I got to build stuff. And then I remember it was a post from Mike Nolan. And if anyone on this call is unfamiliar with who Mike Nolan is, find him on LinkedIn and connect with him, because he's a great friend, especially if you want to try to work at Salesforce. But he posted up, it was a lead federal solution engineer position. So I looked it over and I was like, oh, this seems pretty cool. Like, I think I could probably do this. And then just like Chris said, activate your network. And I happen to know a guy who was a lead solution engineer working for public sector, DoD, in Salesforce. His name was Dave Nava. So, I knew Dave from before. So I reached out. I was like, hey, dude, let's, can you tell me about this SE stuff? So we had, set up a call, 30 minutes, told me, it's like, hey, this is what you can do. This is what SEs do day to day. I think you can do the job. So great, wonderful. So, applied for the position. And let me take it back one step, because we're still in the pre-interview phase. So I'm an avid reader, so I like reading lots of different things. And at the time, so there's an author named Steve Dalton, and he's come out with a couple books. I'll go ahead and drop his Amazon page in the chat there. So he's got 2 books that are really, really great. One is the 2-hour job search. So if you're kind of like in the beginning phases of, yes, thank you, Frank, respect. If you great product marketing there, product placement. So if you're trying to figure out where you want to work, what are the different companies I can work at, that's a great book. And it's a great book because it provides a framework for you to do things. And then the second one is the job closer. And the job closer is the one that just came out at the time. So the 2-hour job search kind of helps you find, like, do the work on what companies you want to work at, get those informational interviews, talk to the people and network. And then the job closer is like, okay, once you get that interview, like set you up for the interview process, like get the resume right, making sure you have your, you answer the questions, like the big 4, like tell me about yourself, why this company, why this industry, why this job, those kinds of things. And it breaks it down in like super easy formats of like, if you nail these 4 questions and the intro, or in the chit chat up front, then that's 65% of your interview. The rest of it is kind of like, only 35%. So I think that for me, like that's what worked really well, is, having a framework to do things, because I'm a checklist kind of guy. So, obviously like networking is first and foremost, because one of the people that I spoke to when I was trying to interview for the job was a current Salesforce employee. Her name is Hillary Zarinajad, and I know she's been on your show, Dave. And I talked to Hillary back in 2018, when I was trying to figure out what kind of jobs are available in the ecosystem. And back then she was a solution engineer. Now she's a success manager. But I reached out to her again and was like, hey, can you tell me about this? So like always be reaching out to folks, always be networking. It's kind of like, it's like gardening. So nod to Annie here, right? So you plant the seeds and you water the seeds, you talk to the people in your network and grow your network. And when you need them, then they will be there for you, because you're not like, oh, this is the first time I've reached out to you. Can you please help me? You've been able to form a relationship with them. And then generally speaking, they're more than happy to help you out.
That's excellent insight. And so I want to piggyback on a couple of things that you both said. So most recently, you mentioned Hillary Zarenajad, fantastic supporter of the Trailblazer community. So if you're interested in customer success at all, there's a couple of videos actually. She joined 2 sessions. Go ahead and watch those and connect with her on LinkedIn. She's more than happy to chat with you. But Chris and Roger, you both talked about the power of networking and and talking to folks about the role so that you can speak that language, right? Because if you get into the interview and you haven't learned the lingo, you haven't talked about, I guess, the value that you can provide in the context of that role, it's not going to resonate, like you mentioned, Roger. So those informational interviews are key. And I would tell anybody that's interviewing for a role at Salesforce for solution engineering, hit me up. I won't turn you down. I will run through both parts of the interview phase with you. I'll take your dry runs for your demos, the whole 9 yards, and I'm actually doing that next week for somebody else. So it's all about the Ohana, and it's all about leveraging your network to give yourself every possible advantage to succeed, which Chris and Roger have both done. Because we're kind of walking through the application process, and so now we're at the resume stage, and you mentioned resumes briefly, Roger, but really for both of you, how did you translate the skills from your previous roles, which weren't necessarily pre-sales related, into this pre-sales role, the solution engineering role? How did you do that? Did you leverage any guidance, any tools, any resources? I'd love to get your take on that. Anybody can go first.
Okay, I'll go first. So for me, like it was back to the book, right? So I had what my resume was set up like, and in the book, the job closer book, it talks about how really like your resume is important, but it's not critical, right? So when I was transitioning out of the Army, like every week I was trying to update my resume because you send somebody and they're like, oh, do this, no, do that. And just, you can way overthink and over criticize your own resume to the nth degree, right? No need to do that. The resume is the resume goes to the recruiter, and it's what gets you the interview. So generally speaking, it needs to be professional, it needs to be free of typos, and really like, it doesn't need to be like super duper long. If you look at my resume, it's 2 pages. I spent 22 years in the Army. The first 15 years were not honestly very relevant to what I wanted to do in the Salesforce ecosystem. So it's the last bullet on my resume, job experience part. And it says like Army leader, increased positions of responsibility. Which is, if you think about it, it's like, man, that really sucks. It's like 15 years of my life. Those are really hard years, but are they relevant? Not so much. So, but the jobs I had later on in my career, they were. And so really it's about like, list bullet items, but list the impact that you had in those different things. So a lot of times it'll say like, oh, if you're an admin, created dashboards, reports, and created custom objects, right? Like, okay, well, like anyone who does Trailhead can do that, like the so what test, right? So like, what impact did those reports and dashboards and like any automation, like what did that have? Created, yes, exactly, Jose, transfer skills. Like I created, reports and dashboards that presented KPIs to the leadership team that allowed them to make decisions, 27% faster, or save the company this much time, increase or decrease rates of performance. And so like people, time, and money. What did you do? Like what you did, how did that impact the company? Because that's what they want to see. Like, okay, like I created reports, whoop-de-doo. I created reports that allowed the sales team to process more sales faster and increase their sales by 27% year over year. Like that's a better bullet. That's all I got.
Yeah, absolutely. And you referred to impact. And so if you want, because, Roger, you mentioned you're a checklist guy. I am too, coming from the aviation field. If you want a checklist for how to write your resume, the STAR, STAR format, you can Google it, is a great way to not only to really construct your resume bullets, but also to talk to your personal story when you actually get into the interview phase. And so, Chris, same question for you. How did you take those previous skills and translate them into a pre-sales context for the solution engineer role?
Yeah, so absolutely agree with Roger. The resume, the whole point of the resume is to get your foot to the interview. Like it's only to get a yes to speak to the people that are actually going to make decisions. Honestly, I would probably say my resume kind of isn't that great. I literally used the LinkedIn resume converter, but a big chunk of that was looking at influencers within the LinkedIn community, specifically around Salesforce, and looking at how they kind of line up things. I actually think the bullet points of what you've done in your career, like Roger, my military one actually sits at the very bottom, and it just kind of says, "Hey, I was a linguist for 9 years." Maybe that garners a little bit of excitement, and they want to be like, "Ooh, languages." But that beginning section of LinkedIn where you are a bit more freeform and really get to call out kind of the things that make you special, that becomes the key pieces. I used to be really against that opening paragraph on a resume. I've kind of changed my tune on that and really kind of highlight it similar to that piece of like, this is why I am passionate about Salesforce and why I'm applying for this role. This may be jumping slightly forward, but not too much. One of the big things within the application that I had to be able to answer was why me, why Salesforce, and why now? I almost wish I knew those three questions to have set my resume and even some of the stuff up sooner. But that was really almost what I was communicating from the beginning anyways, which made answering those questions far easier during the process. So those were without a doubt the biggest one. And then it's really during the interview process that I found the ultimate time to translate my skills, because now I get to elaborate, I get to speak, they would ask questions. And that was where I could say, like, look, I've been to NSA headquarters and I've sat in front of people that, the CEO equivalent, and talked with them, and I'm fine with it. I've been praised for it. I don't get shy, and that really becomes it's not the technical skills from the military. It's the soft skills from the military that you don't realize you're gaining. You work with such a diverse group of people within the military. I had the fortune of working with all four branches because of being within the intelligence field. So, not only diverse within people, but diverse as in rules and how they approach things. That becomes such an incredible skill when you can translate that over to, look, I can work with anybody and everybody. I read what people are needing and can then push that forward. So
yeah, that's fantastic insight, and I want to kind of highlight a couple things you said. Soft skills are definitely key. It's much easier to teach technical skills, because we've all ramped up fairly quickly on the platform, but teaching those soft skills that are going to be pivotal to the role, much more difficult. So if you can show that you have those, but not only that you have them, but relate that like you talked about in the interview phase, to that, that role, the business problems that company is facing, all the more value. So fantastic. Annie, you had your hand raised. You have the floor.
I do. It's not a question, but to build on what the gentlemen are saying, I just did a trailhead, and I posted it in the chat for everybody last night on military veteran recruitment. And it talks about, it's teaching the employer how to reread those skills for our military. Things like what you just said, they're not scared of speaking to, a general, for the civilian side. What does that mean? Thinking about that. Our military have those soft skills where they can talk to different levels of people comfortably. We can speak to people of different demographics comfortably as well. It talks about how some majority of the time when we meet somebody new in the military, it's in a uniform and a haircut. That's the only thing that we have in common when we first meet each other, right? Spouses not necessarily have the haircut, but it's the same thing amongst us too. When you live on base, you don't know who your neighbors are. You get a pick of 3. If you don't pick one of the 3, you go on the bottom of the list and you got to wait for your next pick of the 3, right? That's what you get. You don't get to pick where you live really, because it's all pretty much decided for you. So we learn to live amongst a lot of different demographics that the civilian world doesn't necessarily have exposure to. And so we're just kind of, it's in our blood, right?
Yeah, all that breeds unique experiences that can definitely be leveraged in whatever role. You just have to be able to harness the words to frame it in a relevant context. And that's a skill that you really have to practice. And if I had to go try to tell it, to do an interview today, I would have to sit down probably for hours and spend some time at it, because it's perishable. And so if you're getting ready for an interview, get good at talking about yourself, even if you're uncomfortable about it, because you don't like to brag. It's not bragging. You are providing the employer with, the reason behind why you can add value to their company. And so, set some time aside, think about how best you can phrase these stories, these key moments in your career path, and how you can make them relevant. But thanks so much, Annie, for that. And that's spot on. All right. So we're going to do a bit of a transition. So we're kind of walking through the application process, and now we are at the interview stage. And Chris mentioned earlier that it was one of the craziest interview processes that he had ever entertained. So Chris, start us off and talk about the first phase, which is the behavioral interviews, and kind of how you prepared and how those went, and whatever feedback or guidance you have for folks that that may not know how to navigate the behavioral piece of the interview process, which can sometimes, frankly, be kind of uncomfortable and awkward.
Yeah. So the behavioral piece, and it's really weird because you don't even necessarily know that that's what they're doing, because this is your time where you're not showcasing any of your skills. My process wasn't even normal, because one of the steps that they're supposed to do, they just completely bypassed it. So it was supposed to be, you have that call with the recruiter, and then from there you have a call with the hiring manager. And then it was supposed to be that I would have a call with peer level people of where I'd be coming in at, and then jump to a peer of the hiring manager before moving to the technical. Never actually got to have that one with the peer. So I never even got to ask questions of like, what's a day in your life like? But it's interesting. I actually think that my biggest connection and the reason I got through was when I had my interview with my peer, or my hiring manager's peer. And it felt like family. Like all of a sudden there was a connection made. This is also what threw me off. He was on parental leave. So he's off on parental leave, and he took time from his schedule from being with his brand new kid and met with me for what was supposed to be 30 minutes and ended up going into like 45 minutes as we talked and shared stories. I think that is really the key, is that behavioral part. They're looking for cultural fit. They want to know, like, do I see this person being on my team? Would I want them here? Do they seem coachable and trainable? One of the really awesome things about the ECS operating unit within Salesforce, and this isn't to knock other areas within Salesforce, but ECS builds people up extremely quickly and really pushes them out. So people aren't leaving the ECS department because they're done with Salesforce. They're getting promoted. As I stepped in, my hiring manager got promoted. My team lead that I came onto that team, she got promoted. We just had another manager get promoted. Like, people are my mentor when I came in also got promoted. So Salesforce is filled with extremely talented people that are all looking to grow. And so your hiring manager is looking to see, are you a person that is looking to grow? Do you match that mindset that Salesforce has? They refer to it as a beginner's mindset. It's, do you approach everything as, this is an opportunity for me to grow? Can I become a better talent? And so that's it. Are you a cultural fit? Can they work with you? Can they see working with you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, ultimately, you want to like the people that you work with. You want to come to work with them. And so I think you nailed it. The key is really to be personable, to be your authentic self. And you may discover during the behavioral phase that company, whether it's Salesforce or some other company, is not a good fit for you. So they're not just interviewing you; you are also interviewing them. So keep that in mind as well. No, I appreciate that. Roger, question is over to you, sir.
So first of all, I remember someone told me, and I don't know if it was before the hiring of the interview process or during the interview process, but that getting accepted into Salesforce statistically is more difficult than getting accepted into Harvard, or getting a job at Salesforce is harder than getting into Harvard, because like a million people a year apply to Salesforce, and the acceptance rate is really low. So I believe it, because it's such a great company to work for. So full transparency. 5th or 6th job that I applied to for Salesforce, and first one I actually got. So score, that was good. That being said, so the takeaway there is, like, it's not like a linear path to success. At least it wasn't for me. So I don't know if anyone caught that, but I applied to a lead federal SE position, working for the public sector. I don't work there. I work in ECS with Chris. So I applied. I made it past the recruiter screen. I talked to the hiring manager. Made it past the hiring manager interview, and then set me up with 2 other kind of like peer/cultural fit interviews. And then once I cleared those, then for solution engineers, right, our job is to give demos. So I had, the next phase of it was I had to do a discovery call with a panel of 3 folks. So just finding out the customer's pain points, what they're what they're looking to get out of Salesforce. So that was like a 30-minute call. So that's part of the interview process. And then once you do the discovery call, then you have to deliver the demo. And then delivered the demo. Wasn't the best demo in the world, because I didn't get the job, right? But there were people that were helping me along the way, like Dave said, or like Chris said, like they assign you a coach to help you out. And there were other folks. Once I delivered the first demo, the hiring manager was like, hey, you can let me connect you with another SE on the team who can help you do dry runs. Like Dave said, he does dry runs for folks. So didn't get that job, but he was like, look, he's like, another hiring manager on my team is actually going to have a job requisition that he's got. So I applied for that one. Didn't get that one. But the cool thing about Salesforce is they recognize talent, and they want good people. So it's kind of like you'll interview and interview and interview. I mean, I think I had a total of 9 interviews over 3.5 months. 1 discovery call, 2 demos, and then once I finally met with the lady who's my manager now. The cool thing is, I was like, she's like, hey, I'm glad that you're interested in the job, and don't tell her. But I was like, oh my God, please hire me. But she was like, before you say yes to the job, I want you to talk to a couple of folks on our team just to make sure that it's a good fit for you. Which kind of blew me away. I'm like, I want to work at Salesforce. Being in the Army, I'm used to being, it's like using abuse, right? Just do the job. But she was like, I want to make sure that it fits for you. And these folks were so helpful. They answered any questions. One guy was like, ask me the questions that you're afraid to ask. So I was like, okay, how much do you get paid? Those kinds of things, the taboo questions that you can't really ask people. And he was completely transparent about, anything. So that was really neat. So for me, it was a long process. And it's not you may get the job, you may not. But for me, I'm like, okay, Salesforce is the place for me. I want to work at Salesforce, and I want to be a solution engineer. So it's sometimes, it's not always an easy journey, but if you stay at it, then eventually you'll end up there.
Yeah, and to your point, Roger, the key is persistence, right? So Salesforce is in a big hiring phase right now. We've got close to 75,000 employees. And that's we've added tens of thousands of employees in the past couple of years. So huge growth. And I've known several folks that have applied for roles initially and didn't get it, but came back and persisted and were motivated and proved their value and got brought onto the team. So great point to capture. So we've got a quick question from Sandeep, which I'll answer here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dan for his question or comment. And so I'm just going to scroll up here. Sandeep asks, is it possible to add employee referral after applying for a position at Salesforce? And so I'll just throw that answer out there really quick. There's two ways to do it. You actually, I learned this a couple of weeks ago, because what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to, if you want to, as an employee, offer the employee referral to a prospective candidate, right? And then we as a Salesforce employee would go online, we would complete this form, and they would get a link in their email. It's a special link that is the employee referral link. Well, if you jump the gun and you just apply, there's still a way for you to get the employee referral. You just have to list who would recommend you for that role. Now, hopefully you've talked to that person, and because they'll get an email that will say, hey, do you know Roger Miranda? Would you like to recommend them for the role they're applying for? And if you know Roger, and you can click yes, and you get that referral. If you don't, like if you haven't done your due diligence, that could be awkward. So just make sure the preferred way is to ask someone if they'd be comfortable sponsoring you for an employee referral. Ask me, ask Roger, ask Chris, ask any Salesforce employee on the call, and then proceed from there. But wait for that link that you'll get automatically from the system. And so, Dan, you had your hand raised. Did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Roger was saying about, the ways that Salesforce provides you opportunities when you're doing your interviews. The same thing when I interviewed, the same thing happened for me as well. So I actually was a referral from some prior colleague that referred me in, and they referred it, they put my resume in and everything, and like 2 days after my resume was put in, I got a message from the recruiter said I didn't fit the role. So I told my friend, and she's like, what do you mean? And a couple of days later, I got a message back, hey, we'd like to interview you. So it helps when you do get a referral. I will say that much. And once I interviewed, same thing as Roger said. It was the first time I ever interviewed for any position that they were very open, honest, and transparent about so many things. Salaries, what your positions are. You got to meet the people you were going to work with, because they want, just like you said, you want to make sure that not only is it a good fit for them, but we want to make sure it's a good fit for you as well. So do you all get along well? These resources these things that you guys are doing right now with this, the benefits and the resources, and all of the stuff that you just put together, including the Merivis stuff, is awesome. When I got out of the military in 1994, resources may have been available, but I didn't take advantage of those resources. So I kind of just got like here's the door, we'll show you it, don't let it hit you on the way out type of thing. So now, with all just all I got to say is just take advantage of these, because these are invaluable. I wish I had this type of thing when I got out, because I was like, I don't know what to do. Luckily, I met my wife when I was still in the military on convalescence leave in my last 6 months. And she's like, well, why don't you come to work in IT with me? I'm like, well, I don't, I'm an electronics warfare technician. I guess I can do it. She's like, you can get a job. At the time, you could put an X on the line and get a job. So that's how I got my first job out of the military, was basically not knowing what I wanted to do or anything, and that was it. So these resources and capabilities and these processes and everything in place, take full advantage. That's just my suggestion.
And that's a great suggestion, Dan. To your point, a lot of these resources, didn't exist when Roger and I were, or they existed, but they were, they were just kind of starting to get developed. So they certainly weren't as robust as they are now. And with Salesforce Military's help, but other resources out there as well, Merivis, Forblock, and then other organizations that aren't necessarily affiliated with the military, like Pathfinder and others. There are a ton of resources. And so don't be afraid to ask questions. And I just like to invite everyone to post your LinkedIn link in the chat if you get a moment, especially Roger and Chris. I was going to pull it up, but again, bad network connection. But post it in chat, click and connect with everyone, because not only is the point of these sessions to educate you about different career paths and experiences, it's also to build a community. And a lot of these conversations can take place outside of these office hours where you're just connecting with other folks on LinkedIn and sending them a message and scheduling an interview on your own to chat with them about their role. So please do that, and or send connection requests in LinkedIn. I always say yes. I always approve those. And I know we've got a couple hands raised, so let me go ahead and get to Elio, and then Annie will take your question or comment afterwards.
Yeah, no, I think this is such a great session, David. Once you have the job, it never stops. I'm a director at Salesforce, and I have a 3-year plan in preparation for my next promotion, which is about a year and a half away for that to happen. And a job came up, and I didn't, just being transparent here, I didn't follow our own advice, and I didn't prepared, and I totally blew the interview. And I'm like, man, I'm gonna go back to all my network connections and start just talking about this role, the type of role that I want, because if you're not confident, and if you're not comfortable, and if you're not asking yourself all these questions that we're talking about here, you could blow it. Look, I've been at Salesforce for almost 9 years, and I blew that interview, and the only person I have to blame is myself for not following through about connecting with your network, talking about the role, practicing, getting ready. It's all about preparation. So I just wanted to share that with the group. So I'm taking notes from everybody that's presented today, both thanks Roger and Chris for your input.
Yeah, those are great points, Elio. And I think Chris mentioned it earlier, to have a beginner's mindset. And so, when we don't, and we make assumptions, and we think we'll be okay doing something that maybe we don't have any experience with just because we've done similar things. Yeah, sometimes, it can bite us. So very prescient comment. I appreciate that. And, approach everything with a beginner's mindset. Assume that you don't have all the answers, and do your due diligence, do your work, and you'll never be disappointed. Because you'll know that ultimately you've given it your all. Annie, you are next with your hand raised.
I am. I just wanted to point out Dan and Roger and the comment that they both have made. And it was that they looked at something and said, yeah, I think I can do that. For women, myself especially, when I would look at something, and statistically we know this is true, women look at it and they go, if I don't have 100% of those, I'm not going to apply because I won't get it. We have to stop that as a mentality and as a culture too, and do the same thing. And David, between you and Michael, I give you 100% praise on this, because I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for things like this, the office hours and stuff, and getting that help with the mindset change of go for it, because why not? We need to start asking ourselves why not instead of why should I. It changes that brain chemistry and how we look at something. But I also had a question for Chris and Roger on the interview processes. When you were trying to develop questions that you wanted to ask those that were interviewing you, we all do the research, but what were the questions that you came up with that were those aha moments where you caught the interviewer? Because for me, that's when I know I've done right by myself for an interview, is when I stop the interviewer and they have to think about the answer, because it's not those top 10 lists off of Google. So what are some of those questions that you have that you really want to delve into and know about the company, the culture, the job, whatever it may be?
So I'll go first. So for me, I read this on LinkedIn, right? That's where you find all the good stuff. But I remember somebody posted up, and the question was, so you asked them, tell me a story about something that's happened to you at this company that hasn't happened anywhere else. So, and the value of that is because it forces them to they can't just give you some canned answer of what do you like about your company's values? Blah, 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 blah. Right. So it's it's a personal story that they're sharing with you that highlights, hopefully, what they like about the company. So they'll tell you, it's since, I was able to, take 6 months of paternity leave, and, that, people were covering down. No one called me at all while I was on pat leave, those kinds of things. And then, so that will hopefully encourage them to share a personal story with you on why they really like the company. And then, and depending on their answer, you can just build upon that because they've just shared something personal, very personal for them. And then, you could like, oh, the 6 months paternity leave, like, wow, like that sounds like that's a really great benefit for this, that you were able to take advantage of. And they're like, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. So it kind of gets them to open up. So for me, that's the one question that I use sometimes, not all the times, depending, because sometimes you will run out of time. So be ready for that. Like it'll be a good conversation. They're like, well, Roger, I only got a minute left, but what questions do you have for me? So like have that like quick, like don't ask that question because if you only have a minute. So be ready for that.
I was racking my brain to think what questions did I even ask during the interview process. I mean, if we go back to that question that I had to answer, the why me, why Salesforce, why now, it's almost to pose that back to them, kind of like what Roger was saying. It's, why Salesforce? Why do you like being here? Why do you stay? If there was a better offer coming, would you leave? And if not, what keeps you at Salesforce? All those questions, most of the questions are going to come during this behavior section, the get to know you, the cultural fit section. So ask them the questions almost that, like, I really like the way David kind of posed it. Not only is the interview them interviewing you, it's you interviewing them. Ask them the questions. What makes them a good fit? Why Salesforce? Why did they make that jump? I always checked everybody's LinkedIn backgrounds to kind of see what was their path to get there, and ask them about that. Ask them how they came in, what made them, what was their route in. Basically, all the questions you guys are asking us, the same questions that Dave is posing, like those are your interview questions. This is your chance to ask them and understand, because their answers should be similar to yours, because that's going to let you know that the cultural fit is right.
Annie, I love the question, and Roger and Chris, I appreciate the answers, because ultimately, like, what's the point, right? What are you trying to do in that behavioral interview? And I would answer, you're trying to be memorable. You are trying to stand out from the other candidates that are getting interviewed. And if you're all equally likable and there's really nothing original that you've brought up, you're not going to stand out. And so asking those questions that kind of, gets the interviewer thinking like, oh, to your point, I mean, no one's ever asked me that before. I actually have to think about that one. It's a memorable moment. So great tactic. I love it. Folks, we have about 5 minutes left, and we've got a few hands raised. Michael, I did see your hand go down, but I'm going to try to call on you before we end here. Adam, you're up first, and then Lena, we'll head over to you.
Thanks, Dave. It's not a question. It's probably just like a tip. So, Roger, you're spot on. We've been speaking about company values. I work at Salesforce in Australia here. I've been at Salesforce. I think I just had my 3rd year birthday. But Salesforce's company values are trust, customer success, innovation, and equality. So, when you're speaking about values, that's what the interviewee is looking for when you're specifically looking at working for Salesforce. But it's probably common across the whole industry as well. So be able to recite those 4 values and really showcase that in your resume. For example, I love helping customers be successful, and I love innovating on the platform. So that's just a small tip, just to make sure you know those 4 values, and it shines through not only in your resume but also in the interview process as well.
Awesome points, Adam. Thanks very much for adding your perspective to it. Much appreciated. All right, Lena, did you have a question or comment?
I have a comment. So just to piggyback on what Chris and Roger said, and also Adam just said, I've, as an interviewer here at Salesforce, there's a lot of things that you need to know, but the main thing is just be genuine. Just be genuine. Just make sure you do your research, right? Annie, I commend every junior engineer, females and stuff, and said, ask. If you don't ask, you don't get the answers. And our male colleagues have that down. It's like they go for the champ, they go for the goal, but us as females, we kind of take a step back. And I'm just telling you, go for it. That's what I tell all the mentors, female mentors I've gone for, and that comes to me and want to talk about things. It's like, go for it. You have nothing to lose. The last thing they would say is no. But, if they say no, you just attack again, go try again. The one thing I was like, also, the one thing I always ask my colleagues that comes onto the delivery side, because I am in the delivery side, is know what you want to do. Know where you know, whether you want to be a consultant moving on to a solution architect, or myself, I moved from a solution architect to engagement manager to business, you know, to be a business manager or a project manager. Know what path you want, and if you don't, seek out, like David said, seek out all of us who's here, who's run different roles. Try to understand what they are and whether your attribute fits that, because you never know if you're going to be successful in one field or another. You know, as much as I enjoy the solution side, I also enjoy the project management side, so leading a team. So ask. That's it, David. Thank you.
No, that's a great point, and that's a great way to end the session. Is just, you know, I'll echo what Lena said. You have resources, right? The Trailblazer community is 15 million people strong, and then this small community, a subset of that. You've got some very dedicated people that show up every week that are more than happy to answer questions. So to Lena's point, leverage your resources, use your resources, and we together will help prepare you for whatever career path, you know, that you imagine taking on in the Salesforce ecosystem. That's the whole point of these sessions. So before we do close, I wanted to point out something Nick had mentioned in response to a question. If you want all those LinkedIn links from everyone that posted, just go ahead and do a quick copy and paste from the chat window into an Excel or, you know, a Microsoft Word document, so you can save all those. I won't be able to include all those, but I do include the other links that I've been posting, and you can just go to YouTube for that. It's in the description section if you happen to miss any of that. So folks, this has been an awesome session. Thank you for your patience in dealing with me in the coat room of the Javits Center in the basement. But I wanted to thank not only everyone for attending, and especially the folks that asked questions and provide their perspective, but especially Roger and Chris for volunteering your time to spend it here with us in the spirit of collaborative mentorship. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Wednesday evening. Have a great and safe week. Be safe. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of Military Trailblazer Career Branding Office Hours.